Hi everyone, and welcome to Japanese Politics 101. This is our new series where we're going to focus on a specific issue that comprises Japanese politics. We understand that there are a lot of people that are trying to get up to speed on what Japanese politics is, how it works, the different components of it. So what Michael and I have decided to do is for you, do a deep dive on specific issues. You can take a look at those, pick and choose those areas that are of particular interest to you. Today we're going to talk about the Japanese emperor system, Michael.
The imperial system is the product of an evolution, starting with an ancient tribal system, which is why he's called a tenno rather than the actual word emperor. The word emperor is associated with it, but that's not the word that's used in the Japanese language. And through Japanese history, as different parts and different world forces impinge themselves upon this institution, it developed certain habits. And when we talk about the emperor, therefore, it's not merely a purely Japanese thing. It has Chinese antecedents, it has Prussian antecedents, and America has a lot of an effect on it too.
Mm-hmm. The emperor is currently the longest living lineage, direct lineage, back into history.
Of any monarchy, yeah. And according to the legends, he's the 125th member of the imperial family to sit on the throne. The first 25 are kind of iffy, to put it mildly, but there are persons who believe that the entire lineage going all the way back in time is historical.
Right.
And some of them even sit in the Diet, and they're subject sometimes to a little joshing by their peers. Do you really believe that Jingu is yes, I do. And so there's a certain amount of faith involved.
Right.
The emperor traditionally is a religious figure, and in fact is a descendant of the sun goddess. The divinity, however, of the emperor was denied by Emperor Hirohito, the father of the current emperor, on the 1st of January 1946.
Under a little bit of pressure.
Under pressure from the United States, but one of the things they wanted to do to detoxify the imperial institution after World War II was to get off the idea that he himself is a divine. Mm-hmm. And the current emperor strongly maintains this statement, even though there are movements within Japan that want to have the divinity of the emperor restored. The emperor is not, at present, a kami, a god, but he is indeed the head priest at a shrine, Heisei Shrine, and there is an imperial princess who is actually the chief princess, the priestess there as well. Right. So they do have a religious aspect to them still.
So there are 2 points. We kind of went really fast. It is almost by a quirk of fate that the current emperor has survived that long. There were other lines that probably died out earlier, or warring factions prevented that, but he is the direct descendant, apparently, going way back into unwritten history.
Yeah, well, as far as we can tell.
Right.
There are the histories that we have, which were written centuries after many of the events, obviously gussied up and possibly covered up the fact that there were breaks in the early centuries. But nevertheless, the emperor is an institution within Japanese life and has always been. So if a conservative nowadays says the emperor is the center of our culture, they're not far wrong. Mm-hmm. It's not inflating the imperial institution beyond its station. It has had that station.
Now, always father to son.
That's right. And that is but only a cause due to, however, the imperial house law. In the past, there were empresses, not just female. Well, you can actually call them female emperors, not just the consorts of emperors, but actual rulers who ruled as the center of the country. And that was in the 8th century. They were, in fact, it was more often the case that the ruler was a woman than a man. But under the current imperial house law put together in the Meiji era, the emperor has to be father to son, and that was a crisis. Right. There was a crisis involving that when there were no eligible young males until the birth of Akishino's son. There was this discussion back in the early part of the millennium. Can we go back to the old system of making it possible for there to be female emperors, because nothing but women have been born in the last 40 years.
Right.
That has been put off the table. But currently...
The other idea is have a concubine.
No, we won't go into that. That was the idea of the one member of the imperial family who was well known to have a terrible relationship with his wife.
Okay.
But we're just getting... This is right now, we're all just... We're gossiping.
Okay.
In terms of an institution, in the Constitution, the emperor... The Americans redefined the emperor as not the sovereign. The sovereign is the people. The people have sovereignty under the 1946-47 Constitution. The emperor is still there, and the emperor has functions, and they're all listed in the various parts of the Constitution. It's the first section of the Constitution because it was so important to get it right, and the Americans put it first. He, however, is not head of state. He is not the sovereign. He is the symbol of the state.
Right. So when people say, who is the leader of Japan, it's inaccurate to say, oh, it's the emperor. He isn't the leader of the state.
And he's also, but it's not Prime Minister Abe either.
That's right.
Japan can literally said to have no head of state. But the emperor acts as if he were, and does all the acts of a head of state with the cabinet's acknowledgement and approval. So the emperor has no official position on anything, and the emperor has no official powers. In theory, it's possible that the emperor could refuse a request from the prime minister, such as Prime Minister Abe's going up, which he has to do, and ask the prime minister...
May I close down the diet?
May I close down the diet? That's right. The emperor officially dissolves the diet, according to the law and according to the Constitution. But in reality, it's the prime minister who decides. Right. If the prime minister were to go and the emperor were to say, well, you see, according to the Constitution, I'm the one who does it, and I don't want to do it, it would be an absolute constitutional crisis and could even end the monarchy. So he doesn't do that, even if he doesn't get along with Mr. Abe, which there are indications, very strong indications, that there is a great deal of tension between the two men, particularly in the early part of Mr. Abe's period in office, when it seemed as though Mr. Abe was definitely committed to a revisionist view of history. The current imperial family, under the leadership of the current emperor, is dead set against any kind of backtracking on Japan's being responsible as the aggressor in World War II, any kind of backtracking on any of the decisions of the Tribunal of the Far East, the so-called Tokyo trials, which found that members of the Japanese government had committed the crime of aggression, and several of them were executed, and 14 of them are enshrined in Yasukuni Shrine. Ever since that happened, the imperial family has refused to go to Yasukuni. They used to go. In the 60s and 70s, the emperor would visit. But after that enshrinement, there's been a split between conservatives and the imperial family, and Mr. Abe looked as though he was going to exacerbate that.
Right.
There was that famous incident in April of 28th of 2013 when Mr. Abe tried to establish a new holiday, the Return to Sovereignty Day, a celebration of the day that the occupation by the United States and the Allies ended, and Japan returned to its own sovereignty. Mr. Abe set up this big ceremony and got the imperial family, that's right, the hands up. And at the end of it, the assembled did Tenno Heika Banzai, Banzai, Banzai with the arms, and Mr. Abe did it along with the crowd, and it's never happened again. The imperial family they've never had it.
They didn't like that.
They didn't like it.
No.
Because it reminds them of the past, and the past for them they see as a tremendous burden.
Right. Getting back to the deity of the emperor, there are people who firmly believe that he's still a god, that he deserves to be that, and only because the Americans came in and they said, well, we'll let you stay there, we're not going to execute you, but we could, but you have to give up your godhead.
Yeah, this is just a contingency, and after a certain amount of time,
we'll go back.
We'll go back.
Yes.
The only problem with that is that no member of the imperial family is for that. There were questions about Akishino, and the second son, and his sympathies with some conservative groups. That seems to have been completely wiped away by the birth of his son, who is now heir to the throne. He's now completely...
Cooled that fire a little bit.
He's completely in line with the rest of the imperial family. The imperial family is very careful. They never use the double P-O-N pronunciation of the country. They always call this country Nihon. They never use the pronunciation that is the NHK pronunciation, the LDP's pronunciation, Nippon, which has that strong consonant sound. The imperial family never describes the country that way. They always call it Nihon. And they make sure that these slight signs of nationalism or strong patriotism, whatever it is, are completely erased away from whatever they do. Because they see that the imperial institution really passed through the eye of the needle at the end of World War II, and that they have a long-term view. Now, in terms of the constitutional issue having to do with abdication,
right?
The imperial house law does not allow it. Does not have the possibility.
You're supposed to die in office.
Either that, or a regent takes over in case you are incapacitated. But this emperor doesn't want to have a regent. His own father, Hirohito, had served as regent for his father, the Taisho emperor, who was deemed at some point by someone to be mentally unstable and was put in hiding out in Hayama and died there after many years. He was just, no one really has ever really described to me, at least, what kind of conditions he was kept under. But suddenly his son stepped in as regent. The current emperor says, I'm fine, I'm just old. I don't need a regent, and I certainly don't want to be, I don't want to go out the way my father did. Hirohito, during that, if you remember in 1989, that entire circus of what's his temperature today, what's his pulse rate today, and this tiny shriveled remains of a human being was kept alive by doctors because he was the emperor. The current emperor doesn't want to go out that way.
Sure.
He wants to go out with dignity, and also, I mean, he has made himself a man of the people more than any other emperor in history. He will not, for example, be buried. There are amazing imperial tombs that no one goes to see up in Hachioji, gigantic mounded structures for his grandfather and his father. He says, I don't want any of that. I want to be cremated like everyone else. The imperial family is the only family that's allowed to be buried. Muslims are allowed to be buried in Japan, and the imperial family are allowed to be buried. Everyone else must be cremated by law. He says, no, I want to be like the people. My wife we're just members of the people.
Yeah.
And instead of, and again, these tombs, there's a gigantic one for the emperor and almost similarly sized one for the empress, but they're separate things. He says, no, we want ours next to each other, and small, and please make it small. It's so very different from the Abe style, which is to actually put, to create dignity, to create a sort of authoritarianism. The complete reverse in the case of the image of the imperial family.
Getting back to the official duties of the emperor, one of the most prominent that people are aware of is accepting ambassadors.
That's right. The ambassadors, ministerial appointments, everybody has to make the trip. So he has it's a real job. He's got a real life and has to be there. And it's that daily grind, that actual set of things that he does as official duties. That's wearing down on him. In addition, especially since the 311 disaster, the things that aren't in the Constitution have been wearing down the current emperor. He's in his 80s. And it's this unofficial, the things that aren't written in the law that the imperial family has taken on, all these unofficial duties, visiting all kinds of citizen centers, visiting people who have been evacuated from the nuclear zone, going to all kinds of social events and bringing the imperial institution down.
Being the heart and the soul.
Of the people. Yes. Now that's written nowhere. That's entirely a creation of the emperor. His father started it, but this emperor has extended it, and particularly after 311, when the central government actually lost a great deal of respect to the people, that has been taken up by the Imperial Institution. But that's all unofficial. And all of these duties together are too much for him. And he says, I'd like to hand it off to my son while I'm still a living, breathing, conscious human being.
When you write the date in Japanese, today's date is Heisei 29. It's the 29th year of the Heisei Era. This era started when the current emperor was made emperor.
And when the death of the previous emperor, so that we had a year which has two reign names in it. 1989 has two names in the Japanese calendar, depending on what month of the year it was. So you can still get coins that say 64 Showa. That was only a month long, you know. But you sometimes get them in change, and they're kind of rare. But the decision there was a hope that they would be able to run it on a January 1st. So
that would be convenient.
That would be convenient to make the changeover. But with the election and the lack of an extraordinary diet session this year, they're not going to make a January 1st deadline. So they've put a new deadline of April 1st, the fiscal new year, next year.
How about that?
So that calendars
1st,
next year are going to...
The schools all start on that day.
Yes, it'll be fine for the schools. It'll be fine for calendars that are bought. But people who buy yearly calendars will have an invalid last 9 months of the year.
The chief diet cabinet secretary usually holds up a card that has the kanji for the new era. And who decides what that kanji is going to be?
That's the thing. It's really just decided by the government. There's no commission. There's no group. Abe may appoint a commission in order to make a cover-up or at least provide a set of reasonable ideas. But it's very interesting that the same person who held up the card last time, Obuchi Keizo, that said Heisei, that the name of his faction is the Heisei Kenkyukai, right? There can't be any coincidence between those two things, the Tanaka faction, the Heisei Kenkyukai. So whatever the next reign name will be, it will have some kind of positive meaning, and it will try to put a positive spin on the establishment of a new era. But it will be in the middle of the year, at least in terms of the Christian calendar. So it's going to be kind of an interesting future problem, because we have an everyday problem in that we always have to be calculating in our heads when we deal with government documents.
Births, right.
Right. What year was this? Okay, this was Showa 39. Okay, Showa 39, that would be 1964.
Right.
Or this was Heisei 12. Heisei 12. I guess that would be 1997? We're constantly doing that. In this case, this will be a year which has both the different reign names, and it'll make it just all the more interesting.
Before we wrap it up, let's talk about the Imperial Household Agency. What's their role? What do they do? How large are they? How powerful are they within the context of the Japanese government?
Well, okay, first of all, it's a division of the government. It's not set down as a constitutional office. It is something that the government has set up to manage the household affairs. It is staffed by very senior people, all of them fairly conservative, because they are there to conserve. They're there to preserve a 1,500-year-old institution from any kind of disrespect, any kind of pollution, any kind of dissolution of its image. So they tend to be really harsh on any kind of innovations or variations. So the emperor, while being the nominal head of state and the heir to all of this tradition, must work politically with the Imperial Household Agency and the bureaucrats that serve there. So they're not all powerful. They don't manipulate the emperor like a puppet.
But they've got throw weight. On their business card it says Imperial Household, and I represent the guy, right?
Right. They do have throw weight, and in terms of the Imperial Institution historically, they're pretty low key. In the past, the emperors were puppets, very frequently replaced when they were put in place when they were children, and when they became young adults, they became too uppity, and they were replaced by somebody else. Powerful families, the Fujiwaras of Heian times, would be entirely in control in the political and personal lives of these individuals. The Imperial Household Agency has to accommodate the real life world of these individuals. They have, for example, they had to somehow really polish up this very odd couple that has come out with Princess Kako and this seemingly vapid individual that she went to ICU, International Christian
Vapid
University.
individual.
Well, they're so desperate to find things that he's done.
They just fell in love.
Yeah, but they're young people who went to college together, and the Imperial Household Agency is impressively and at the same time depressingly trying to make him more than he is. He's just a guy.
Right.
But they have to accommodate these issues of humanity.
Right.
So they're not ogres. They did, and certainly some of the branch families, which are no longer noble, certainly made life for the current crown princess, Masako, hell. But they also made life hell for her predecessor, the Empress Michiko. There are families that are waiting on the outside. They were disestablished, had their nobility removed from them by the United States government in the occupation. They're still there. They guard themselves and their names, but they have no means of currently getting back into the lineage.
Right.
There's no way that the imperial household law, as currently written, allows them back in. But they're still there. There are still some very proud families with ties to the imperial house. Now, the imperial house has a basic sexist rule that once a woman marries, she's out. That may have to change because the imperial line is going extinct. And the current Constitution of Japan needs an emperor. The emperor is part one of the Constitution. Japan cannot live without it unless there were a completely new constitution. Who knows? Maybe constitutional revision will happen that way.
I don't know if the emperor lives in the coolest house in Tokyo, but he's got a really magnificent yard.
Yeah, he's got a nice spread on the former grounds of the Edo castle of the Tokugawa.
He occupies the entire area inside the moat, and this 5.2 kilometers, people are running around it at all times of the day. That's his residence.
That's his residence, and it is because the imperial family is by habit and also by, well, it's hard to say, a sense of responsibility. They are extremely educated people. They have advanced degrees. The Crown Prince and his brother both have PhDs from British universities. Emperor Hirohito, the current emperor, and the second son, Akishino, all were biologists. And they made sure that the gardens around them are these very rich, varied woodland.
It's a managed garden,
It's an amazing,
Yeah.
plant species of all kinds, animals, birds, everything, all living in the middle of this metropolis, this oasis. And it's an incredibly rich environment. It reflects their commitment. Now, one of the things that it's perhaps hard to understand is that there are no scandals really involving the imperial institution. The greatest thing that is a scandal is if someone marries for love. That's as far as anything. That in itself is scandalous. But this is nothing like the crowned heads of Southeast Asia or of Europe, where you have fodder for the scandal mags. A scandal in Japan is if someone faints at a reception. Right. And they are the Imperial Institution is a guardian of Japan's culture. They oversee poetry contests, which they must compete in and write their own poetry. They are all musicians. They all play a different classical musical instrument. They are absolutely the vanguard of culture also within this country.
And there are hundreds of secret ceremonies and little things that they have to do throughout the year.
They're well employed. They have many things, and then on top of that, they have served since 311. But before 311, they were sort of irrelevant off the side. Now they're front and center in Japanese life, and that's something that's new and has changed. And it's taken some of the gloss and some of the focus off of the prime minister. in many
Right.
ways. And so Mr. Abe lives in a special environment that his predecessors, particularly Koizumi Junichiro, didn't live in. In Koizumi's time, he really was the center of attention. Nowadays, Mr. Abe can, let the emperor shine.
One final point. The emperor has children. They don't live inside the emperor's palace. They live very close by in another wooded neighborhood.
Yeah, in the Akasaka Palace, one of them, and then they're spread here and there. Again, the male side of the line, they are kept in palaces. Women are moved out as they establish their own households, but they have a very limited physical living area. They're not like the Queen of England.
They get a salary.
They get a salary.
All of the children get a salary.
They're all watched very carefully. They really are a seriously well managed and an important part of Japanese life. Now, the current emperor is beloved, and there's a good chance that his successor will be loved as well. What happens later, in 40 years, who knows? But 40 years is a long way down the line for all of us. You and I may not even be here.
We could talk for days on this. I don't want to get too long-winded. We already have a little bit. This is the Emperor System. Please stay tuned. We'll also deep dive into other aspects that might be important to you. Please stay tuned.